Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks. And this week, does this 40-year-old $600 amp really compete with a near enough $6,000 two-rock? We are of course talking about the Fender Concert. Now, in light of last week's episode, taking a look at the iconic Fender high-powered Tweed Twin, without which probably wouldn't have Marshall as we know it today, it seems near enough unfathomable to think that Fender, such an innovative, forward-thinking company that have been responsible for so many legendary amps, not to even mention guitars, would ever find themselves relegated to simply following the crowd, chasing the success and circuitry of relative new kids on the block, like Mesa Boogie. But rewind to 1980, and that is exactly what was happening, as evidenced with the introduction of the Fender 75, which is essentially a Mesa Boogie clone. After it failed to make much of an impact, Fender took drastic action, recruiting amp guru Paul Rivera, a renowned amp tech from LA who had extensive knowledge of Fender amps in particular, having modded hundreds upon hundreds for LA's top session players from his shop at Valley Arts Music in Los Angeles. Paul signed his contract with Fender in January of 1981, setting about work on the 2 series of amplifiers, which were to be introduced in the spring of 1982, as well as 4 new designs, including the Studio Lead, the Stage Lead, the Yale Reverb and Super Champ, the fabled Super Champ. There were also a handful of takes on existing Fender classics in the shape of the Harvard Reverb 2, Champ 2, Princeton Reverb 2, Twin Reverb 2, Deluxe Reverb 2, and arguably the flagship of the series, being offered in several different combo and head configurations, the Concert 2, simply branded as the Concert. Although the series was moderately successful at the time, it's estimated that around 60,000 amps in total were sold. It's only really in recent years that the reputation has finally started to precede them. The Concert in particular, primarily in the wake of a glut of YouTube videos espousing its tonal benefits, its impressive feature set, and its relatively low price point. For reference, I actually own 2 concerts from this era, a 1x12 combo and a 4x10 combo, both of which, together combined, cost me just shy of £1,000. Now, the 4x10 is a relatively recent addition to the stable, but having owned and gigged pretty extensively actually a 1x12 concert combo over the last year or so, I thought I was relatively well positioned to try and answer the Studio Rat's recent question. Is this really a £600 amp that competes with a near enough £6,000 two-rock? first thing worth touching upon is its incredibly impressive feature set. As many others have pointed out before, these were the last series of amplifiers to be hand-wired at Fender's original Fullerton factory, before CBS sold Fender in 1985 to an investor group led by then President Bill Schultz for $12.5 million. Crucially not included in that sale was Fender's Fullerton plant, which meant that for a period in 1985, there were actually no Fender guitars being built in the USA. They were all being built in Japan. But I digress. As I said, the Concert is a ludicrously well-featured, well-appointed amplifier, primarily as a consequence of the demands of flexibility and versatility from LA's top session players of the day. And as such, the Concert is point-to-point hand-wired with 2 foot-switchable channels, clean and dirty, high and low sensitivity inputs, a bright switch, a mid-boost, buffered effects loop with dedicated send and return level controls, a line level output for direct recording or running something like a wet-dry setup, tube-driven reverb, etc, etc. It is a superbly featured amplifier, even more so considering it is just celebrating its 40th birthday. Now, to be honest, I don't really use any of what you might consider the more advanced features of this amp. I've never been a particularly big fan of effects loops, for example. Not all effects loops are created equal, but it's worth pointing out that the effects loop in the Concert is a very high quality one. But I still run all of my effects direct into the clean channel without the bright switch engaged. But in regard to that clean channel, it is really a good one. It's very reminiscent of blackface Fenders, but being a 60-watt amp, arguably with more headroom than anything in that era the Fender were making. Now, at the time of purchasing this amp, you also would have been able to upgrade the factory speaker to an EV12L. Neither of my models have these, unfortunately, but that said, the stock speakers sound great, and although they might benefit from an upgrade, I guess they've been gigged pretty hard, it would seem, over the last 40 years. It's not really essential, as both of them sound very good. It's also worth mentioning that the bright cap, in my experience on Fenders, can be a little bit aggressive, a little bit over the top. It's infinitely more subtle on the Concert than pretty much any other Fender I've ever experienced, and as such really could come in useful to just brightening up subtly darker sounding guitars. The one consistently polarizing element of these amps, however, is of course the overdrive channel. I guess you could say that generally for Fender amplifiers, but specifically with this series of amplifiers, I guess given the prevalence and the popularity of Mesa Boogie at the time, you kind of can hear what they're shooting for. Of course, Mesa Boogie's having a particularly distinctive sounding overdrive channel. Honestly, I couldn't really ever foresee myself in a situation where I would use it as a standalone overdrive sound, but where it does excel, the one situation where I have kind of found it to work, is if you're looking to use it as a very subtle kind of fattener or solo boost for the clean channel. You can EQ them pretty similarly, so they sound relatively close to each other, and then kick in that overdrive channel as a subtle lead boost or kind of fattener, as I said. But if you're expecting to get a kind of standalone lead sound out of it, or a standalone overdrive sound out of it, I think you probably will be disappointed. But of course, each to their own, and I know it does have fans out there, so I'm not going to denigrate it too much. That said, the clean channel really is fantastic, and of course at 60 watts, there's plenty of headroom, which makes it an ideal pedal platform. So why are these amps so cheap? Now, of course, cheap is a relative term, and to be honest, even a quick glance at Reverb or eBay or Facebook Marketplace would suggest that this stock has risen even over the last year or so since I bought mine. The cheapest I can find in the UK at present is just shy of £800, with the most expensive being just over £1,000. Still, I guess you could make an argument that for such a kind of well-appointed, sturdily constructed amp, that is still a bargain. But either way, why the price hike in the last year? Well, I guess one explanation is that word is just finally getting out. After all, these aren't exactly a new amp or indeed a secret. Larry Carlton is a known fan, as is of course David Gilmour, who used the 2 series pretty extensively throughout the 80s, notably the twin Reverb 2 and the Concert 2 at Live Aid of all shows, as well as a whole host of kind of session gigs throughout the 1980s. They really aren't without their fans. More likely responsible for the price hike, however, apart from videos like this one, is their recent transition into that increasingly vague threshold of vintage, which of course, now this being a 40-year-old amp and with its classic blackface Fender aesthetic, will give it an increasing level of kudos in the next couple of years until, ultimately, I guess people start to see sense. That sense being that as much as this is a truly brilliant amp, I own 2, I guess that would attest to as much at the very least. They are brilliant amps undoubtedly, but I think it would probably be a stretch to say that they do compete with super high-end boutique amps like 2-Rock. The clean channel unquestionably is incredible. I'm a big fan of the clean channel, but when it comes to the overdrive channel, as I said, I think you'll struggle to get anything particularly usable out of it, especially in a modern context, which, as much as I've not directly compared it to the gain channel on something like a Bloomfield drive, I have played that amp pretty extensively in the past, and would say that its overdrive channel is in an entirely different league to the Concert. Now, it's also worth pointing out that the day I bought my 1x12 Concert combo, I actually spent a good amount of time, a few hours if memory serves, comparing it to a mate's 1966 Deluxe Reverb. Of course, that particular amp I've done videos on pretty extensively in the past. It is a particularly good sounding Deluxe Reverb, so not really a fair comparison, I would suggest, but as much as there were undoubtedly commonalities, the clean sound of the Deluxe Reverb was arguably streets ahead, especially in terms of touch responsiveness, than the Concert. But all of that said, as I said, these are brilliant amps, especially, I would say, if you can find one in the kind of £500 to £600 range, or maybe $600, $700, depending on the exchange rate at the time. They really are a bit of a steal in that price range. But, as I said, recent examples would suggest that this stock is indeed rising, so it might be a little while until they're around that price point again. Mine, as I said, has served admirably over the last year, especially as a backup to my 68 Pro Reverb in light of that blowing up, and paired beautifully with my Super Reverb, and that exact combination that I'm going to play you out on. As ever, I'm Chris Buck, this is Friday Fretworks. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, hit the bell icon if you haven't already, and I shall see you next week for another episode. Cheers guys, take care, see you soon.